Hi guys, welcome to yet another episode of Your Technologically Inept Foods Teacher. I am here to talk to you today about yeast. First I want to tell you a quick little story. So the story of a lady named Mrs. Pac-Man. Mrs. Pac-Man here, she eats these beautiful cherries and realizes later that, oops, she's allergic to those cherries and begins to fart out those big carbon dioxide bubbles. Basically, I'm using Mrs. Pac-Man as an analogy for yeast. Yeast, they feed on sugar, which represented by the cherries, and then they fart out carbon dioxide, which is one byproduct, and ethyl alcohol. So this is the reaction. So it's a basic fermentation reaction, the same reaction that would happen when making wine, kimchi, and any other food that would be fermented, okay? So today I'm gonna be demoing for you the basic sweet dough recipe. So this dough is awesome. I'm gonna post all different ways of shaping this recipe, and this is definitely going to be included in your Google Classroom. So a few things to remember, 675 to 800 mils of flour. Just because it says that large amount, that doesn't mean that we're going to be using all of that flour. We do dough to the touch. We don't necessarily need all of this. This is an estimate. Okay. So make sure we're going to use hot water or milk whenever we're making a sweet dough. So a sweet dough, or we call it a rich dough, is a dough that involves butter, eggs, usually, versus a lean dough, which just has very basic baking ingredients and no butter, no eggs. Also, this dough has sugar. So when we're using our hot liquid, we're going to heat it in the microwave probably 20 to 30 seconds tops. When you put your finger into it, you do a finger touch, it should be as warm as a hot bath or a hot tub. If you put your finger into it and you say ow, and then you pour that on yeast, the yeast will die immediately. Okay? So it's very important that if you're going to use a thermometer, that it's between 35 and 40 degrees Celsius, or if you're just using a finger touch method because you don't have a thermometer, hot bath needs to be the temperature of a hot bath. Okay, so let's proceed with our demo here. All right. So I have all of my ingredients all pre-measured out for us. So in this bowl, I've already got my yeast, my sugar, my salt, and my flour added into this single bowl, Now, I mean, you could totally put all of these ingredients into a KitchenAid using a dough hook. I have a KitchenAid. My KitchenAid is like 1,000 years old, and I don't like to test its strength, so I'm going to do this the old school method with a good old wooden spoon. This is what I call my bread making spoon, so a nice small end is really good. So I'm going to stir my ingredients together. So I've got maybe 250 of flour, maybe not even 250, 200 flour, my yeast, my salt, and my sugar, okay, because this is a rich dough. So now I'm going to heat up my water. So the recipe is slightly different than what I'm going to show you. I do prefer my method better than what the recipe says. So I'm going to add in all of my liquids. Now it tells you to melt the butter, so I'm going to do that in the microwave. I've got my eggs beaten here, or my egg beaten here. And then in some later videos, you're going to see me take this very same sweet dough. You can shape it in so many different ways, it's unbelievable. And a lot of you have already done it in cinnamon buns. We've done it in cheese and green onion buns, which a lot of my students enjoyed. Today I'm going to do an apple pie braid, and then I'm going to show you how to shape this into a blossom, a flower blossom, which is kind of like a sweet tea bread. It's good if you rip off a blossom and have a nice cup of tea with it. So I'm going to get my warm water. Now, that's not quite warm enough. All right. So everything is mixed here together. I'm just going to wait for my water to warm up, and then I'm going to quickly melt my butter, but I'm going to add in all three of my liquids at the same time. So my three liquids are my eggs, melted butter, and my warm water. Okay, warm as in bathtub warm. Okay, so I've got bathtub warm water here. If you find that you overheat your water and you're like, oh, I think that's too hot, just give it 1 or 2 minutes, and it will definitely cool down, and it'll be fine, and you can use it. Okay, Now, other things that are helpful for you to use in your kitchen. So I have a counter scraper. A lot of people don't have a counter scraper in your kitchen. And this is for scraping dough off of counters. It's also for helping you to section out dough. It's an awesome tool to have in your kitchen. If you don't have one, you could also use a leveler, and then just the flat side of a leveler like this on your counters for scraping down a counter. This is a very handy tool. But if you're in a pinch, you can use an old card, like a Tim Hortons card or some kind of card that you have in your wallet. And basically you can use this to scrape down your counters if you don't have either of those two tools. So you could use something like that as well. All right, so now I have my, so what I like to do is I'm gonna pour in my butter first. So this is my melted margarine. Then I've got my hot water. Then I've got my eggs. Now something that if all of you are in my class, so you know that I like to keep a pretty clean cooking environment. It's important to clean things up as you go. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna work our dough together here. Now it's gonna look pretty chunky. It looks pretty chunky, right? We want to add enough flour to make this look like chunky oatmeal. That's where we're gonna start off. You know, so it should be liquidy, but still pretty chunky. So basically, as soon as you add liquids into a dough, you're beginning to develop the gluten. The gluten is activated. So gluten is a complex of two proteins that exist in flour, glutenine and gliadin. And basically, gluten is what allows all flour products to be nice, smooth, and elastic. And it also is what allows yeast, when they fart out those beautiful carbon dioxide bubbles, it allows that carbon dioxide to be trapped and expand inside of its elastic matrix. So I'm gonna start to add a little bit more flour. Now you wanna continue to stir and add enough flour until your dough pulls away from the sides of the bowl and makes an independent dough in the bottom of the bowl. So you can see it's getting thicker, certainly quite liquidy, but once it's not sticky anymore and it's forming an independent dough, this is a signal that it's time for you to turn it out on a floured surface and knead it. Okay, so now again, if you have a KitchenAid with a dough hook at home or some type of Cuisinart mixer, totally use that. I would not recommend using a hand mixer because it'll ruin the engine on your hand mixer, okay? So a KitchenAid can a small classic size KitchenAid can probably take a recipe that's up to 2 or 3 eggs, okay? So this is a very viscous mixture, so you are really going to test the power of any type of electrical equipment, and it's a part of the reason why I kind of like to do things by hand sometimes, just because, you know, it's really hard on your equipment. You can see it's getting, you see a dough starting to come together. Okay, that's great, and I'm gonna continue to sprinkle my flour. Notice that I'm not sticking my hand in the bin of flour, okay? It's not super sanitary, so always use a little cup to pull from, rather than sticking your hand in a bin of flour that you might have at home, right? Always think of cleanliness and hygiene. Okay, all right, so we wanna keep going until this is a nice, that it pulls away. It's starting to pull away, but you don't want it to be super sticky either, okay? Because I have a saying in my class that sticky things stick to other sticky things. So it's important that you keep your hands relatively clean and you keep your counter relatively clean and dusted with flour so that they're not sticking together. Okay, so you can see I've got a dough that's starting to pull away from the sides. When I touch my dough, I can feel that it's slightly warm to the touch, and that's a really good indication that you've heated your water just enough. It's just slightly warm, nothing too crazy, but slightly warm. And so you'll know that your yeast is activated. So I've got my dough ready to go. So now I'm going to turn out my dough on a floured surface. So what does that mean? It means flour your countertop generously. Spread that out with your hand there. And, oh, I've got a nice dough. It's nice and soft. So this dough is tried and true, done it millions of times. That's why we do it every year for open house, because it's very hard to mess up this dough. Okay, if you feel any sticky spots, you can use your dough, pick up flour from the counter itself, or you can pull from a little cup that you might have in front of you. So we're going to continue to knead this flour. So we're using instant yeast. So if you're picking up yeast at a store, you want to buy instant. So instant or quickrise is what it will say on a jar, so make sure that's what you choose. Stay away from traditional for the purposes of what we're doing here. Traditional yeast, a lot of the yeast in that jar are usually already dead when you buy it. So using instant yeast, everything that I do with you guys for the most part here is going to be with instant. It's a product that you can make quickly within a 2-hour window. Okay, so use instant yeast. Okay, it's going to be faster. You're going to get a product faster, and it'll be easier for you to work with. Now, where do you keep your yeast? You keep your yeast always in the freezer, and basically if you do that, it'll have an infinite shelf life. Okay, now when we use this instant yeast, we always knead our dough for 5 minutes. Okay, we need to be very careful. So I feel a little bit of stickiness. I need a little bit more flour. I'm going to pull from here, dust a little bit more on top. We have a 5-minute kneading period. Now after that, after we're done the 5-minute kneading period, you notice that I turn the dough over itself and I gently push with the palm of my hand. I pick up a little bit of flour if you find there's a little bit of sticky bits, you can use your counter scraper or whatever you have to scrape off your counter and put some fresh flour and continue your kneading. But you want to knead for 5 minutes. So how do you know when you're finished kneading? There's a few indicators, and the indicators are that you don't have any raw starch on the outside of your dough, that your dough is smooth and elastic and somewhat shiny on the outside, and that you can actually start to see small air bubbles coming to the surface of your dough. Those are all indicators that your dough is finished being kneaded. So what do you do once your dough is kneaded? Then you rest it underneath of a bowl. So usually I've just used the same bowl I made the dough in so that I don't have to dirty another bowl. And because I know how much my students hate dishes, so you're welcome. Just use the same dirty bowl to rest it. Then you rest it for 10 minutes. The resting period does a few things. It allows the yeast to produce carbon dioxide by coming in contact with the sugar. It allows the gluten strands that are very tight right now to relax and spread out and to allow carbon dioxide to expand into those spaces. Okay? Okay? All right, so that's where we're going to end off. Stay tuned for the video that goes with this on shaping.